Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to get started in just a minute or two. So glad you're here. Welcome, everyone. We're just going to get started in one more minute. So glad to see everyone join us. All right, thank you everyone who's joined us. So glad that you have. Let's get started. My name is David Greenberg. I'm Vice President for Community Research and Impact at LISC National. Really glad that you're joining today for this webinar titled Advancing Racial Equity Through Supporting Developers of Color, Reflections from 3 Programs. So as everyone knows, initiatives to support developers of color have taken root across the country as a strategy to overcome long-standing inequities in real estate and capital access to support small businesses and build community wealth. Today, we're going to be sharing lessons from 3 multi-pronged LISC programs that partner with developers of color in the Bay Area, in Los Angeles, and in New York. And while all 3 of these programs are very distinct in their strategies in ways that I think are going to be very interesting to get into, the programs, which all have been supported by Capital One, were designed to address these inequities by providing training, by providing mentorship, and by providing access to low-cost, flexible capital. So today, we're going to be hearing from implementers and participants in these programs, though it's also important to note that there are really developers of color initiatives across the LISC network, and LISC as a whole is making support for these initiatives a major part of our overall strategy in 2023, led by my colleagues in the economic development team. We'll also have time for Q&A. So please put questions in the Q&A throughout the panel, and I will do my best to synthesize them for the last 15 minutes or so of the webinar. So I'm going to introduce participant bios more fully as we get to each panelist, but want to say that we're going to be hearing first from Desiree Francis, who's Managing Vice President of Community Finance at Capital One, from Randall Powell, who is a co-founder and CEO of Infinite Horizons, LLC, and a participant in New York's program, from Monica Dean, Director of Housing for LISC New York State, from Tia Hicks, Program Officer at LISC Bay Area, from Alexandra Dawson, Director of Lendings and Investments from LISC Los Angeles, and from Connie Max, Executive Vice President for Lending from LISC. So I will be kicking off the roundtable in a moment with some findings from LISC's Community Research and Impact team on the 3 programs. But first, let's please hear from Desiree Francis about Capital One's interest and motivation in the work. And before that, let me introduce her more fully. Desiree Francis is Managing Vice President of Community Finance at Capital One, leading the company's lending and investing for affordable housing development. Community finance originates over $1 billion annually to finance affordable developments, primarily financed with low-income housing tax credits. Through its social purpose program, the team also invests in resident services that support resident and community well-being. She joined Capital One in 2008 to establish loan and investment originations in New York and New Jersey that promote affordable housing and support community revitalization. In 2004, Desiree began leading the Capital Officer Originations team, which seeks to source and originate financing opportunities within Capital One's footprint. She is the External Affairs Diversity and Inclusion Accountable Executive and is member of the Voices Business Resources Group Advisory Board. Prior to joining Capital One, Desiree served several different roles within City Community Capital and in the Bank Supervision Group at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And Desiree currently serves as the president of the board of AHIC, a national organization for investors in affordable housing. Desiree, thank you so much for coming and for sharing your perspectives.
Thank you, David, for the introduction. Good afternoon. As David mentioned, my name is Desiree Francis, and I lead one of the teams at Capital One that finances affordable housing across the country. Affordable housing is a key component of Capital One's Impact Initiative, an initial $200 million 5-year commitment to support growth in underserved communities and to advance socioeconomic mobility by closing gaps in equity and opportunity. Capital One's philanthropic investment in the LISC Developer of Color Capacity Program is an example of an opportunity for us to partner with organizations within our community that are focused on breaking down barriers to racial equity. Of particular interest is understanding the developer needs. What are potential strategies and tactics that can be scaled to close equity and opportunity gaps, all of which are important to advance socioeconomic mobility and to break down these barriers. Today, I look forward to hearing about the lessons learned and the outcomes from the programs in New York, the Bay Area, and Los Angeles. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it back over to David so we all can really listen and learn from our panelists today. And thank you again for having me. David?
Thank you so much, Desiree. As closing gaps in equity and opportunity, that's really what we're talking about today. So I have a very brief presentation, really want to get to the panelists, and I'm going to try to share screen. Just give me 1 second, please. Hopefully that's working. So as I said, we really want to center the experiences of practitioners today, and we'll be hearing from them in a second. But before then, just some high-level framing and insights to tee things off based on some research that my former colleague, Patricia Voltolini, led for our division. So first, just want to describe very briefly the inequities that are motivating LISC's initiatives. I want to share just a little bit about the program models, these very different kinds of programs, and talk about their outcomes, again, at a very high level, and then reflect on some cross-site learnings and reflections. So in a nutshell, this work is motivated by the fact that developers of color are underrepresented in the real estate industry. On the for-profit side, this stems from the racial wealth gap that's made it hard to build assets and balance sheets among emerging businesses. And on both the non and for-profit side, it's because exclusion from past development opportunities and experiences has a similar effect. Finally, research has shown that people of color do not have equitable access to mentoring and support networks of people with resources. And so building on best practices in the industry, LISC's initiatives provide responses to each of these inequitable factors. They provide low-cost, flexible capital. They deliver training through tailored, culturally competent curricula, and they create mentorship and networking opportunities. So despite these commonalities, the three models that we're going to be hearing from today are really quite varied. And I'm especially excited to hear about the decisions that informed these different designs. So in the Bay Area, the Alameda County Housing Development and Capacity Building Program works with faith organizations, especially those community anchors with available land for development, to help them become full partners in the development process in ways that really befit their status as community anchors. In Los Angeles, the Keep It Affordable Academy brings together for and not-for-profit providers who are focused on expiring use properties as well as unsubsidized ones in the private market. And recognizing that public policy has to be a good partner in this effort, the initiative is also focused on identifying and promoting policy solutions. Finally, in New York, the Developers of Color training program focuses on for-profit BIPOC developers who in general have been shut out of development opportunities, with a focus on networking to capital sources and finding ways to respond to procurement opportunities. So obviously a ton more nuance in all of these programs, but wanted to set out these sort of high-level focuses: faith organizations, preservation, and for-profit developers as an example of the variety within program models and the choices that designers face. So what did they accomplish at a very high level again? So over the course of Capital One funding, the Bay Area conducted intensive training of 11 participants and web-based training of about 150 more. And this resulted in 4 feasible development concepts among the cohort. Los Angeles managed a very successful cohort of 6 participants who received 5 pre-development grants and who have already started to engage in public policy in ways that we'll hear about later from Alex. And in New York State, 56 participants over 3 cohorts came together. They reported, 85% of them reported an increase in skills, and 9 received loans, and 57 matched to investors, as Randall and Monica will shortly share. So what are some learnings or reflections that come from these programs? So there are a couple that I want to highlight. One, trainings are really filling very important knowledge gaps for participants across the 3 programs, regardless of their levels of experiences. And programs really need to be adaptive to meet people where they are in their journey as developers. Doing that, however, is really time intensive for program designers. So it's really important to budget for that, and in terms of time and resources. And it's also important to understand that developers who are more experienced in the continuum are the ones who are most likely to be transitioning to deals first, at least at the beginning of an initiative, with some of the ongoing coaching and cohort building, supporting others in their paths over time. So that's about adaptivity in trainings. A second point that's come up from our programs is how important it is to build cohorts through really interactive trainings. This happens through one-on-one peer sharings. It happens through participants co-leading sessions, sharing their own experiences as experts themselves. But this interactivity is especially important, we've been told, given the fact that many sessions, at least early in the pandemic, were remote, and what we're all experiencing in terms of the difficulty of connecting with each other remotely. Third, one-on-one coaching really matters, but not just any coaching that is really well matched of people to each other. And that's also something that designers say can and should take a good deal of effort in their programs. Next, we've heard that networking, especially networking to potential investors, is a really critical component of developers of color programs. We'll hear about that, especially from the New York State Initiative in a moment, about their Shark Tank matching event. Next, capital access was really important. This is a core theory of change component of this model. And participants really said that it helped them. It helped them cover pre-development gaps, and grants covered important early operational and staff needs. But there were a lot of gaps for all the inequitable reasons that I cited earlier. And so in response, LISC offices are really thinking about additional financial products or helping developers connect with other kinds of funders and capital sources to move their projects to the next level. And Connie Max from LISC will talk about that from a LISC-wide perspective later in the event. Finally, programs can leverage the cohorts and the networks that they're building to support systemic change efforts. This happened as several groups in the Los Angeles area started to coordinate their preservation advocacy efforts in ways that we'll hear about from Alex. One moment. Okay. So thank you for letting me kick that off. And I'm going to now get to our panelists. First, I want to turn to Randall Powell. So Randall is co-founder and CEO of Infinite Horizons, LLC. Infinite Horizons is a certified New York State and City minority business enterprise, MBE, real estate development firm that was founded in 2007 by Randall and his brother, Roland Powell. Since its inception, Roland and Randall have been committed to their development as principals of the organization, as well as the strategic growth of their firm, with an aspiration that I think is becoming realized, Randall, to become 21st century leaders in affordable housing. They also believe in the social justice mission associated with the development of affordable housing to create safe, quality, and ecologically sound housing for the residents and the communities they serve. So Randall, you were a participant in New York State's program. Can you tell us what your journey as a developer has been like, how you came to the work, maybe also a little bit about what the New York program was like, and especially the Shark Tank event, and finally, maybe offer some reflections about how it's helped your business. I know that was a lot, but I know you also have a lot to say.
Thank you, David, and thank you for the rest of the panelists for being here. So for Roland and I, affordable housing really impacted us directly. We're originally from Southeast Jamaica, Queens, and during the 2007 and 2008 housing crisis, we really saw the disinvestment happen in our community. We were one of the areas that was adversely impacted, with a lot of foreclosures, a lot of people being evicted from their homes, and being, community-minded individuals, we thought, we can't let this happen in our neighborhood. And as the pandemic and the different issues started to transition, we started to see it happen in areas like, Brooklyn and the Bronx. And, we were like, we can't let all the hard work of so many Black and brown communities, just go to waste and have families lose their value, which is something that, a lot of, minorities invest in, when they, get into the, housing. So when we created Infinite Horizons, it was the real goal to help support and, take a lot of that disinvestment, back off of the market and put it into qualified homeowners. And what we thought, would be the best opportunity was to actually, go out there, purchase a lot of these foreclosed properties and use a product at the time through the state called the Neighborhood Stabilization Program to make it more affordable on the back end to homeowners. And we were able to execute on that and, see that growth. And then as we started to move down the journey of developing affordable housing, we participated in various RFPs and RFQs through the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. We were awardees of the MWBE Round 1 RFP, where we have a site we'll be closing this year, new construction ground up project in the Bronx. And what was really unique about that is the first place I thought to go for a pre-development loan was LISC. And, they were very welcoming, and our relationships with, Arturo and Monica and Valerie, really helped put that, loan into fruition. We were able to take care of a lot of the early pre-development cost. So as we started to move down the path, we always, we train, my brother and I are always involved in some type of training experience. And when the LISC Developers a Training Program came along, it was just like the perfect timing, everything that was happening, prior to the pandemic, post-pandemic, a lot of the inequities that were taking place when it just comes to accessing capital, made it really important for us to get into the program so that way we can really hone our skill set. And, as we, think about the training program, what was very unique about it was the quality of, developers that were participants along with us, a lot of colleagues and friends, as well as a lot of the mentors that we ended up being paired with throughout the training program, and a lot of the core topics that, came to be a part of the syllabus and as part of the instruction that we really kind of, thought were timely and very needed. We know what we know and we know what we don't know, but at the same time, getting that perspective from, a well thought out program and working with mentors and being able to kind of, exchange ideas with colleagues led us to become, involved in other programs. And, we kept that momentum going. And I think what was really unique about the program is, I'm a big fan of Shark Tank, and venture capital, and, seeing, Damon John, who's another, Queens native, go out there and really pitch and have that opportunity to use the LISC Developers of Training platform to expand our voice and get in front of organizations that we would never have gotten in front of before. And I think that opportunity is what has led to a lot of the momentum that we've seen as an organization. And, we were able to take down investments both at the corporate level as well as the project level through this platform. And it's, been literally like, moving, like quickly ever since. And it's great that, we participated in it. And, if my brother was here, he'd probably echo the same responses, but, it was great timing. It was well thought out. And I think that, when you look at this in the long term, we need more opportunities like this, where you couple the training with the, capacity of having finances and strategically thinking about, how we're going to grow our cash flow, how we're going to strengthen our balance sheet, how we're going to, be able to take down our own guarantees and become prime developers, and not always have to share in the economics of projects where we put in a lot of the sweat equity. And I think that's what makes a lot of these, developers and developers of color, very strong, is the fact that, we have that skill set, and now we're starting to get that support through programs such as this.
Thank you so much for those really powerful reflections about your work. So, really coming out of the foreclosure crisis that's so impacted Black and Brown communities. You spoke about the capital access challenges so common to developers of color, and I think a really important point about how sweat equity and the work that developers such as yourself are able to put in can really be enhanced by other investments. Thank you. So I want to turn to Monica D now, who has shaped the program that Randall took part in. Monica is the Director of Housing for LISC New York State. She's responsible for developing and implementing programs to build capacity and expand opportunities for underrepresented firms owned by people of color or nonprofit mission-based institutions in the real estate industry. She develops affordable housing policy and goals, establishes programs to grow capacity in the affordable housing industry, and positions LISC as a premier lender in the affordable housing space statewide. Prior to joining LISC, Monica served as Senior Vice President of Resident Services at Opportunity Communities in Boston. And before that, she was the Director of Resident Services for Nuestra Comunidad Development Corporation, a CDC in Roxbury, Massachusetts. So thank you for joining, Monica. So I wonder if you can just reflect a little bit on Randall's experiences. You know, how was his experience like? How does that reflect the decisions that went into your shaping this program as you designed it? What did you really see as the critical opportunities for developers in the market? Like, what were you trying to capitalize on?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Randall. I'm so happy that you're here and able to share your experience and perspective on the LISC New York's Developers of Color Training Program. And thanks, David, for the introduction and the question. So let me just briefly begin by sharing and or reflecting on the decisions that we made to design LISC New York's Developers of Color Training Program. So we conducted a feasibility study in the spring of 2021 where we held focus groups, we interviewed leaders and developers of color from the real estate industry in New York to get their responses, which really helped to inform and guide the design of our Developers of Color program, specifically to support Randall's company, Infinite Horizon, and other Black developers in New York. So in collaboration with Columbia University, who designed the program, we included topics, some of which Randall just mentioned that were very helpful, topics that, you know, were reported during the study that we conducted where developers really needed more support. So sessions like underwriting the deal, how to select a joint venture partnerships. And I heard from, you know, developers who've been developing some, you know, a lot longer than others, but it was specifically interesting to hear from the developers who had a little bit more experience, but still not really getting contracts and really an opportunities to expand their businesses, that they learned more from the program than they had in the decades and decade plus years of developing and being in this space. And so the design of the program, you know, also included what we call the Shark Tank pitch style contest, which Randall mentioned briefly, which is the concluding component to every cohort. And so at the end of, you know, every cohort, we put together this event where we bring financial institutions in to listen to projects that developers select from their pipeline and pitch to the investors. With the plan is to get access to capital to help fund and support the projects in their pipeline. And I'm happy to say that Capital One, as you know, one of our sponsors of this program, they've served as a shark for every single cohort. And as David briefly mentioned, we've completed 3. So the conceptual design of our program is really rooted on amplifying BIPOC developers' professional portfolios by expanding capacity and project access through technical assistance. You know, but more importantly, enhancing their networks and technical know-how. And so we are providing direct strategies to advancing the wealth generation BIPOC developers and community developers need for that true racial equity. You know, and when I think about the critical opportunities that we see for-profit developers in the market and the things that we're trying to capitalize on as part of our program, some of which Randall talked about a little bit. You know, I think that for-profit developers, you know, should be supporting up and coming developers. And, you know, a lot of that is not really happening, as you heard in some of the data that David shared. You know, developers of color, they are still not getting their fair share of procurement today. And so, there were lots of established developers now who started back in the 80s and the 90s, and they didn't have to put out all of the money for acquisitions back then. In New York City, they were, begging developers to take some of these buildings. And now we're in a whole different era from when, majority white men were organizing and were able to take titles to help build up their companies. Now, that same group that got the leg up to build a business from scratch should, but aren't lending opportunities for Black and brown developers to help them build acquisition, and some would say is out of control. When you look at the scrutiny that exists now that didn't exist back then, developers are always saying, they're getting asked, do they have the capacity? Do they have financial capacity? And some of these issues and challenges that they are facing right now are not as big of a deal today than it was back then. And so our programs is, specifically designed to create opportunities to help advance equity, through the partnerships, mentorships, and joint ventures to support up and coming developers. So, I briefly mentioned this earlier, we do see the access to capital opportunities as a direct avenue to support, developers' portfolio, their longevity and their wealth generation. We put our developers in front of financial institutions, during that concluding event to help them get capital to support their projects. And so these are the components that are essential to our program. And, these are the opportunities that, we provide our developers of color, throughout the 3 cohorts and continue to do so moving forward. So David, I hope I addressed both the question in the 2-part question.
No, absolutely. I really appreciate that. And I especially appreciate you putting out the history that, a lot of developers in New York State really were incredibly supported by primarily white men by a different era when they had access to, they were supported by government and lenders to start to build their portfolios and buildings in a way that your program is really trying to address by providing networks and skills and capital for developers of color as they are working and catching up and putting in the sweat equity that Randall talked about before. Thank you. Let me turn now to Tia Hicks in the Bay Area, a native of Oakland, California. Tia Hicks is a cross-sector social equity practitioner that's utilized grassroots organizing and racial equity principles to advance just outcomes for low-income communities of color in Oakland, San Francisco, and Detroit. In her current role as program officer with LISC Bay Area, she manages the faith and housing program that supports faith-based and community-based organizations to build affordable housing on their land in the Bay Area. And prior to joining LISC, Tia served as the policy director of community education for Hope San Francisco, Hope SF, a public housing revitalization initiative within the San Francisco mayor's office. In this role, Tia played a pivotal role in addressing digital equity issues in support of equitable education outcomes during distance learning for students living in public housing during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, where distance learning was certainly a lifeline. So thank you for joining, Tia. Wonder if you can talk a little bit, so the program in the Bay Area is specifically designed to support faith-based organizations in partnership with housing developers in a way that tries to build on their status as community anchors and to make them full and equal participants in the housing development process. What were you seeing in the Bay Area and Alameda County as the needs that kind of directed you toward this strategy? And what are some of the things that you feel most proud of in terms of program accomplishments?
Thank you, David. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm really happy to be here with you all today. I would say there are three kind of thoughts that we had that directed us to this strategy to support faith-based organizations in developing affordable housing on their land. In the Bay Area, we have a severe affordable housing crisis, which I think is the case across the country, but is very acute here. Longtime residents are being priced out of the neighborhoods that they have called home for decades. And unsurprisingly, people of color are hit hardest by this crisis. So since 2015, more than 30% of all low-income people of color were displaced in the Bay Area, and over 50% of all people of color are housing burden in the Bay Area. So it's really acute here. At the same time, faith leaders in the Bay Area have been serving their communities for a long time. So they're really well positioned to meet the need of developing affordable housing. They continue to meet critical social services. They've been doing it for a long time. They've been doing it through the pandemic, and they're continuing to do that now. And so they're really on the front lines of that work. Also, faith leaders are some of the largest land bankers across the country. Specifically in California, UC Berkeley's Turner Center revealed that there are over 38,000 acres of faith-based land that could be developed for affordable housing. So we really saw, the availability of faith lands to meet the affordable housing crisis regionally here in the Bay Area. And we know that faith leaders, this is relevant work for them because they want to assure that they're meeting the needs of the communities that they serve. And I will also say that Black leaders in Alameda County really advocated heavily for this program. There was a bond measure that was passed in Alameda County, I want to say in 2016, and faith leaders really turned out the vote to get that bond measure passed. And as a result, they advocated for capacity building dollars to be able to explore building affordable housing. And so as a result of that, the LISC Bay Area program has been very intentional about designing the program to meet the specific needs of Black faith leaders. And so our kind of pilot cohorts has really been targeted and centering the needs of those leaders in the community. And so essentially we're supporting Black-led development. And I think it's really rooted in those three areas of addressing the regional housing crisis through the availability of faith land, since land is so scarce in the Bay Area and is a big barrier to developing affordable housing. And then something that I'm proud of with the program, I think that, the themes that are across all the programs around the training, I think that affordable housing development takes a very long time. So in the interim, I'm really just proud of being able to arm folks with the knowledge so that they can understand the decisions that need to be made to continuing to steward their land for the community. I think that faith leaders, there's an opportunity for them to be taken advantage of. They can be in vulnerable situations if they don't know all the things to think through. And so our program is really designed to give them as much resources and technical knowledge as possible to navigate those decision-making points. I would also one example that I would like to highlight is the work that we did in our second cohort, where we supported a pastor who's building senior housing in West Oakland. He came to us already pretty far along, he was already working with he was already in a joint venture partnership with an experienced developer, but he still wanted that knowledge. And so, from his participation in the program, he was able to move from securing entitlements to actually securing the rest of his financial resources to build the development, and he'll be in construction starting this May. So we're really excited about that. And he definitely is a champion and credits the program that has helped him make those decisions to get to construction. So I hope that answers the question, David.
That's amazing. That's amazing. What a high point to to leave with. So, addressing the regional housing crisis through Faith Land, supporting and led by Black leadership in Alameda County, and arming people with the knowledge that they need to be good partners. I mean, thank you for all those reflections. Let me turn now to Los Angeles and Alex Dawson. Alex leads LISC LA's housing team, where she manages real estate investments that facilitate the production and preservation of affordable housing and facilities in the region. She joined LISC in 2016, and since then she's managed $90 million in LISC investments that have supported the development of over 2,300 units of affordable housing and 128,000 square feet of commercial space throughout the region. She oversees the statewide LISC Housing Development Training Institute, or HDTI, and the Keep It Affordable Academy, which she's going to talk about in a moment, as well as other forms of technical assistance programs. As a native Southern Californian, Alex is passionate about affordable housing and community revitalization in Los Angeles. Prior to joining LISC, Alex served as project manager for the Cesar Chavez Foundation, where she was responsible for managing new construction and acquisition rehab projects across the Southwest. So Alex, the Keep It Affordable Academy is especially directed toward preserving both unassisted and low-income housing tax credit, LIHTC, financed affordable housing. And within, I think, both of those kinds of housing types, there's a real clear public policy dimension. And your program is really designed to identify and propose policy solutions to preserve the housing stock generally. So could you reflect a little bit about how does the policy component interact with the training and the sort of grant and loan capital provided by the initiative? And what have you seen as some of the successes of your cohort on the policy front?
Thanks, David, for the introduction, and so great to hear from my colleagues about all of the amazing work that they're doing across the country. I'm inspired by all of your programs. And thanks again, David, for the question. I want to give a little bit of background about the program, and then I'll kind of dig into the piece about policy. But we, similar to Monica, after doing some research and data review in our region, we developed a program based out of some of the needs that we saw on the ground related to preservation in Los Angeles. Across LA, there is an emerging cohort of nonprofit community land trusts and minority-led developers that are really gaining ground with preservation strategies, both for unsubsidized and subsidized affordable housing. With the Keep It Affordable Academy, we saw an opportunity to strengthen the network of these organizations doing the work, both nonprofit and for-profit developers of color, and to prepare them for policies that were actually taking shape and moving forward both locally and statewide. With that said, the implementation of the Academy was timely because of where kind of policy was moving as we were ramping up this program. As my colleagues mentioned, affordable housing is a huge problem in Los Angeles, and preservation in particular is something that, everyone who works in affordable housing in our region knows preservation is important and something that we need to tackle from multiple angles. Yet the capacity needed for organizations to take on the work and the capital resources available locally and statewide really have not been in alignment with the pressing need. So the Academy aimed to bring together emerging developers that were primarily really neighborhood-based and may not have had the traditional low-income housing tax credit development background, yet understood from their community development work and interactions in their neighborhoods that housing preservation is critical to maintaining the makeup of their communities. So while the cohort brought together new and more seasoned developers, they were at the same time, there were also policy ideas locally and across the state coming together that would actually make these preservation deals feasible in the short term. So as part of the kind of main training components for the Academy, we brought in policy experts to give updates on the latest policy efforts, because a lot of things were moving at the time, such as the statewide foreclosure intervention housing preservation program, or FIP for short, and other local priorities, such as Measure ULA that passed in the fall of 2022 here in the city of Los Angeles, and the ongoing work of the Community Land Trust pilot program in LA County. So through the Academy, we really wanted to prepare our cohort members to be able to respond to funding opportunities that were growing over the program implementation period. So both through the monthly meetings that we had, the one-on-one meetings, and our cohort interactions, we brought tools to the table to help our cohort members think about preservation plans for their neighborhoods and how they'd be able to set themselves up for success and access these resources that were coming down the pipeline. We covered topics such as nonprofit tax concepts and CLT structuring, to joint venture considerations, assessing pre-development needs, and brought in case studies from recent preservation projects from across Los Angeles and across the state. And with these technical assistance tools, along with the grant funding that we were able to offer through Capital One, our cohort members were able to dive more deeply into the organizational planning work that had to be done to prepare for funding coming from some of the passage of these policies. The cohort members continue to engage in policy advocacy discussions and keep moving this work forward. And in terms of successes, one of our cohort members for the first cohort was able to officially establish the first community land trust in the city of Long Beach, which is very exciting. As they were doing this and moving about this work, they really gave the city of Long Beach encouragement that a community land trust model really presents a viable model for preservation. And late last year, the city of Long Beach released a request for proposals, which will award recovery fund dollars to provide seed funding for an official City of Long Beach Community Land Trust as part of the city's strategic goal to build stronger communities through investments in housing and neighborhoods. So I was really excited to see that our members were pushing their city forward with some of the policy objectives that we're aiming to promote through the Academy.
Thank you. That's very exciting. So really a critical role in translating policies, especially emerging ones, in ways that can let developers of color have greater access to them, and in turn have the cohort push policy forward. And what you said about establishing the first CLT, really doing some path breaking work to take advantage of them. That's really great to hear. And in the Q&A, there was a question about CLT, so maybe we can return to that later. So thank you everyone for reflecting about your experiences and really amazing programs. I want to throw it out just broadly, and anybody should answer. But you all talked about the importance of the sort of three lanes of the work. The training, mentorship components, this real community building, and then obviously the capital access piece. So just some reflections about how these elements, in your view, complement each other, and how can they be best integrated, because I'm sure that there are some real practical questions about how to draw these components together. So anyone should feel free to unmute and take it away if they have some thoughts about that.
Go ahead, Tia, or I can jump in.
No, you go.
Okay. Yeah, so my experience with the academy here in Los Angeles is that those three components that you mentioned, David, training, mentorship, and capital access strategies kind of naturally strategically align. And the folks that came together for our cohorts really all have a common interest, and have been open to receiving mentorship and advice, not just from us at LISC or the guest trainers that we brought in, but from each other. I think someone mentioned earlier, like having cohort members actually present on topics that they're experts in the field, really gives a lot of power to the cohort members to learn from each other and to feel like they can reach out to each other and lean on each other for advice or cooperative work down the line. I think one thing that worked really well, just in terms of kind of digging in more with each of the cohort members, was having dedicated one-on-one time a couple times throughout the cohort with each cohort member to really dig into the challenges that they're specifically facing, whether it be around training or mentorship or capital access. That really allowed us to tailor our interactions with each member to meet their specific needs and offer them additional guidance that may just really be specific to them. So those elements in combination really set our cohort members up to think about how they might put together a plan to access grant capital or financing capital and really put that to work. So yeah, I think I attempted to answer the question. Maybe pass it to Monica and Tia.
Sure, I'm happy to go next to you. So no, I would definitely add to that and piggyback off a little bit of what Alex said. So I definitely know, right, that there's an alignment with every component of our program. And in some way, they're kind of like all interdependent, of one another. And so, for example, the coaching, AKA mentorship, we put a lot of thought just into that component of the program, because we feel that that's just as important of having a coach that's aligned with the market in which the developers are specifically focused on, so they can learn from not only a more seasoned developer, but also have that one-on-one time to specifically talk about their pipeline and support that's needed. And so throughout the program, right, we have all these different components that are working together. The networking piece. So not just thinking about how important the networking sessions were for the program, where we're bringing in the commissioners of city and state run organizations, building these relationships that they didn't have prior to participating in the program. Now they know who to call at HPD and HCR and some of the other city and state organizations, because through the program, they've been able to build these relationships through networking amongst the cohorts. And so the first cohort was like our pilot inaugural cohort. So when that cohort ended, we had cohort 2. We brought them all together. So cohort 1 is already sharing their experiences with the next cohort. But more importantly, I heard in like the first session where we brought the cohorts together, they were already talking about joint ventures and partnering. And a lot of them, the developers from cohorts 1, 2, and 3, are working together on deals. So amongst the program, the networking and the deals are happening, and conversations and relationships are being built. And it's also, when we think about the training piece and and they're topics that developers need to touch on, they forgot and just need to know how to better just do these applications to get these contracts. But we definitely learned that integrating them effectively can absolutely help developers of color build capacity to support their businesses, stabilizing the networking opportunities. And again, the primary goal, access to capital through these strategies, very important, and definitely kind of a lesson learned about the importance of having these different elements and how they, work together throughout the program.
I can jump in as well. I agree with Alex and Monica. All three components are really, really essential to the faith and housing work that we're doing. I think, as I spoke about before, the training is just really arming our participants to have as much knowledge as possible to navigate the development process. The coaching is really essential because in a lot of our with a lot of our participants, the coaching brings an independent eye to some of the deals that are already happening that really prioritizes, the faith leader's stakeholder in a deal. And then I will also say that the capital piece is really important as well. And I kind of want to talk about that integration a little bit more. I think it's important to bridge training and coaching with capital so that we actually support real projects for communities. I think it's an opportunity to move beyond like theoretical, these programs are great, to actual implementation for communities of color. So I think leadership development is important, and we need to support the visions of community. And the way to do that, I think, effectively is capital and investment. So with Faith in Housing, we offer modest pre-development support. And it's actually an important infusion of capital because we can pay for like the early pre-development costs to determine the concept and feasibility project that would otherwise be really difficult to fund. A lot of our local jurisdictions, some of our local jurisdictions in the Bay Area, they don't have a lot of money to support that very early pre-development need. And so it's a significant investment. And I think it also, us being able to align capital with our capacity building programs kind of demonstrates for LISC and for us, it's putting your money where your mouth is. So it's really, being about what we say we're about.
Thank you all for those really important reflections. And I think a real thread among all of your comments was the role of mentoring and sort of creating, like gluing together these different components of the program, making sure that people both have access to capital and know when they're ready to go for it. So if we can, let's please turn for us a broader LISC perspective. These are three incredible local offices running great programs. As I mentioned before, LISC has developers of color programs throughout its footprint of 38 offices. And to talk a little bit about how LISC has partnered with developers of color and what we've learned about capital access, we're going to hear from Connie Max, who currently serves as LISC Senior Vice President for Lending. Ms. Max leads a team of 43 professionals in the daily operations of our lending division, including originations, closings, and asset management of its $580 million portfolio. Ms. Max also supports efforts to raise and deploy special funding sources. Most recently, Ms. Max served as Vice President and Chief Credit Officer for the Nonprofit Finance Fund, managing the approval and portfolio management processes. And previously, she serves as a Director of Prudential Financial Social Investment Division, managing a portfolio of socially motivated investments of debt, equity, and tax credits. Prior to joining Prudential, she was a Managing Director with Shorebank Advisory Services and as an advisor to the International Finance Corporation, the IFC, the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and the European Bank for reconstruction and development. And in this role, she launched and led a 3-country commercial loan program in Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. She began her community development work when she left a mainstream real estate finance bank to volunteer in the Peace Corps in Costa Rica. She speaks Spanish and some Russian. She holds a BS in business administration with a finance concentration from California Polytech State University, San Luis Obispo, and a master's in international business administration from the American Graduate School of International Management. So Connie, thank you so much for your reflections.
Thank you, David. I need to shorten that. It sounds like I can't keep a job. I've been at LISC 10 years, so really happy to join this panel. And David, thank you for creating this space. Agree. Thank you, panelists. And, it is an inspiring conversation. And I want to thank Monica for inviting me to be a shark, because I'm really cool for one day out of the year, because I'm like, oh, I'm a shark on Shark Tank. And everyone's like, wow, that sounds really awesome. And then Randall, bringing borrowers like Randall to LISC, who is a repeat borrower in our portfolio. So great to see you, Randall. Love to hear about the different initiatives and different focuses. As everyone's pointed out, LISC works through 38 offices. We're community focused. So I'll start big picture, talk a bit about the portfolio, and then get down a little bit to products and how we structure our financing to support emerging developers, borrowers of color, many who are not emerging, but just, looking for some early stage financing. LISC has been around for more than 40 years. We are a community development finance institution. So we're a little different from a bank. Our right to lend comes through the Community Development Finance Fund, which is part of Treasury. We get the dollars that we lend typically by borrowing them or raising them through grant sources to be able to stretch our credit box on occasion. As David mentioned, we have about $580 million outstanding. The majority of our financing is housing, affordable housing and home ownership, rental housing. And we have, kind of an average loan size of 1.2 million. So we're not, the big banks doing super large transactions. And the average term of our loans is about 3.5 years, trying to extend that a little bit more. We do a lot of early stage financing. So about a third of our portfolio is acquisition. We do construction and we do pre-development, which when I participated in these panels, I feel like that is LISC's, additive piece of financing is the early stage pre-development financing. LISC is focused in communities, and a few years ago we adopted our 10X initiative, which is to address the racial wealth gap, support generational wealth and wealth creation in the communities that we serve. LISC can, we look at ourselves as a lending partner, and that we're the but-for lender in many cases. Our pre-development financing tends to be kind of the first relationship that we have with some of our borrowers, and we try to structure our debt in a way that is reimbursing some early stage third-party reports, helping to do some site work to see if the project will be viable, appraisals, checking, supporting to get entitlements or LIHTC applications, architectural drawings, but we tend to milestone our work. And Alex is a frequent flyer at credit committee and is very familiar with our milestoning approach, which is we can generally lend up to 250,000, and Randall is a borrower in pre-development, and so we kind of partner along the process. And once you get site control and the project early stage third-party reports show that it's viable, we will advance up to 500,000 per project in pre-development. Oftentimes that pre-development comes with acquisition financing following the pre-development, or in some cases we're reimbursing previously financed with equity pre-development costs along with the acquisition, and we do construction financing as well. We've taken some time over the last several years looking at our racial equity and lending. We've taken, a review of our requests for debt and looked to see which ones didn't move through and why. And we've changed some of our practices over the last few years. We've gone out and done an assessment of our appraisers and made a list of appraisers that are reliable for the communities that we serve. We've changed our risk-based pricing, which we used to price our loans with a review of track record, equity, balance sheet strength, and additional shovel readiness of the project. We've eliminated that because we had concerns that it was going to inadvertently charge a higher interest rate. And when we did review that, we actually do have and have raised significant special funding sources to provide a lower cost of financing to our BIPOC owned and led organizations. So, but we did eliminate risk-based pricing, and our pricing is consistent on term. So we continue that practice. We have regular meetings with a combination of legal, lending, asset managers, local office staff, credit committee members to review what our practices are and how we can do a better job of expanding our reach and our potential, access to credit. And we do, get a lot of requests from these training programs. We have a really solid track record of being able to support BIPOC developers. We've raised dollars through the Mackenzie Scott grant, and in the last about 18 months supported 45 loan requests that were 10X eligible borrowers. So often we're the early stage financing, and then we end up working alongside banks for later stage financing. But we are closely aligned with our local offices and their programs. All requests for lending come through the local offices or the rural programs. We have financed successfully a number of faith-based borrowers in their development of their affordable housing or sometimes homeownership projects. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Connie. It's a great overview of all the ways that LISC is partnering and striving to be a good partner. Those are great reflections. Trying to synthesize some of the amazing Q&A chat, and I think there are two directions, and I'm just going to throw it out to the panelists to see which one they might want to take on in the couple minutes that we have left, and also would invite Desiree to join me if she feels like it. There are a couple of comments about and questions about implementing developers of color programs in different contexts, like rural places, and with different organizations like CLTs, community land trusts. So I mean, one question you can take if you want is like how widespread across the country and different kinds of contexts you really see the needs to be. I know you have your own experiences that are very much rooted in your cities, but how widespread do you feel like the need is? And do you have any thoughts about bringing new or different kinds of groups into the fold for this this kind of initiative? So that might be one way of synthesizing things. Hope that's clear. And then we got a bunch of really great questions that we might even answer later about the curriculum themselves. So length, you know, where the training modalities are in person, how frequently do you meet, and especially some questions about how to deliver content on complicated topics like LIHTC preservation and joint ventures. So maybe a question, the second kind of question, if you choose to answer, is like, what's the secret sauce? What's the thing that you feel like in your curriculum and the training that you provide that is really a key? There's not just one key, but a key to helping move developers of color forward. So first question, you know, how do you get more people, more kinds of groups into the fold? Second, how do you what are you really proud of in your curriculum?
Sure, I'm happy to start and answer that question. So I know that we're already having conversations internally about internally in LISC about expanding the Developers of Color program across the country and other cities. And so that is a conversation that we're having, because I know we definitely know that our curriculum is replicable. And I would also add some other, to answer some of the questions regarding the module and the format. And so with the first cohort, we were knee deep in the pandemic. So it was entirely virtual. We met once a week for about a full day, once a week from October until the end of January is when the first cohort concluded. And so we heard a lot of feedback as part of our learning, evaluation and assessment, you know, some of the things that worked and some of the things that didn't work, including how often we met, the time frame, even some of the topics. And so we have been able to build and add on to every single cohort. So some of the topics that David just mentioned, like how to select an appropriate joint venture, how to hire a property management team for your firm, how to apply for LIHTC. All of those are topics, that we include in the curriculum. We also do a series of different workshops. And again, those workshops are designed based on discussions that we had and additional information that's needed to support the developers within the cohorts. The second cohort, we met twice a week. The third cohort, we met twice a week. And then we added the in-person component with the in-person networking sessions for cohorts 2 and 3. With cohort 1, Randall, I think we met for the first time in March, and the program concluded the end of January, but because of COVID, the entire first cohort was virtual. So I think I answered a couple of different questions.
I can hop in. Oh, sorry, David.
No, please.
Okay. I can speak to our training. So we offered monthly trainings. We offered 10 monthly trainings in our last cohort. And I think like the secret sauce is that we've been really successful with partnering with some of our local experts in the field who are so willing to come and share their expertise around securing entitlements, building neighborhood support. How do you actually pick a joint venture partner? What are the things you should be looking for? We did some deep dives around financing affordable housing, looking at LIHTC. So really just developing trainings that are relevant to our cohort members along the development process, and also tailoring the trainings to where folks are. So we don't offer like a broad. We don't offer like a cookie cutter training. We really work to understand where folks are in the development process and tailor the trainings to that. So that's kind of our experience in the Bay Area.
That's terrific. And there was another question in the Q&A about how to build trust with developers, and it really seems like that's a way of doing it. You ask what people want to know, and you design a program specifically to respond to them. Wonderful. Any other final reflections on really some great questions that we'll try to answer maybe in a follow-up email if we can. Some particular to different panelists, including you, Randall, and others that just show the tremendous interest in these topics and your powerful work from across the country. So, any final thoughts or reflections? If not, I'm just so grateful to everyone for joining and sharing of their work and their experiences. And hope it was informative and that everyone has a good rest of their day. Take good care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Desiree, for supporting us.
Thank you, David.
Thank
Thank you,
David.
everybody.
Thank
Been
you
a
all
pleasure.
for all your great work. Good
Thanks,
luck,
everyone.
Randall.
Take care.
Thank you. Appreciate it.